The GPS died 3 hours ago. Sarah kept glancing at her phone's blank screen while Marcus steered their kayak through the increasingly unfamiliar bends of the Missouri River. What had started as a weekend adventure, a simple paddle from reservoir to reservoir, had turned into something else entirely. The late September air carried an unnatural stillness that made both experienced paddlers uncomfortable. "That wasn't there on the map," Sarah said, pointing to a large island emerging from the evening mist. Thick stands of ancient cottonwoods crowded its shores, their leaves shivering despite the still air. She'd studied the river charts meticulously before their trip, a habit from her days as a geological surveyor. Islands appeared and disappeared on rivers, true, but something about this one made her throat tighten. The water was rising. They both knew it. The dam upstream had been releasing more flow than usual, and the weather report had warned of rain. The island seemed their only option as dusk approached. Their original campsite, a well-marked spot on the river's edge, had been swallowed by the swollen waters hours ago. "We'll make camp and get our bearings in the morning," Marcus said, though Sarah noticed the uncertainty in his voice. In 15 years of friendship and countless river trips, she'd never heard that tone from him. The moment they dragged their kayak onto the silty beach, Sarah felt it. A wrongness she couldn't name. The cottonwoods loomed impossibly tall overhead, their canopy creating patterns that hurt her eyes if she looked too long. The branches seemed to twist in ways that defied natural growth patterns, forming fractals that made her dizzy. They set up camp in a small clearing, their tent a fragile bubble of normality in what felt increasingly like alien territory. That's when Sarah noticed the holes, perfect spirals in the sand, as if drawn with a mathematical compass. "Marcus," she called out, "have you ever seen anything like this?" Before he could answer, a low humming began. Not from any direction, but from everywhere. The trees seemed to pulse with it, a vibration that resonated in their bones and made their teeth ache. Sarah's scientific mind scrambled for explanations. Power lines, underground water, geological phenomena. But each theory felt more inadequate than the last. That first night, they lost their camping stove, simply vanished from where they'd placed it outside the tent. Then their spare battery pack disappeared from inside Marcus's sealed backpack. Small things, but each disappearance felt deliberate, choreographed. The trees had moved closer, Sarah was certain of it. The clearing was smaller, and the spirals in the sand had multiplied, forming complex patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Neither of them slept. The darkness brought sounds they couldn't identify. Not animal, not mechanical, but something that straddled the line between organic and mathematical. Sarah found herself tracing the patterns in the sand with her fingers, only catching herself when her hands began moving of their own accord. "We need to talk about what's happening," Marcus said on the second day, his voice thin. "Last night I saw shapes in the sky, like geometry gone wrong, and the trees, they're not trees, not really." His hands shook as he tried to sketch what he'd seen in his journal, the pages filling with impossible angles and recursive patterns. Sarah had seen them too, impossible angles folding through space above their heads. The cottonwoods swayed in complex patterns, their movements synchronized to some alien rhythm. The island felt larger than possible, its shores stretching beyond what physics should allow. When she tried to walk to the water's edge, it kept receding, the trees parting and reforming in her path like a living maze. On the third day, they found the drone. It was half buried in the sand, its camera still blinking weakly, a high-end model clearly not meant for recreational use. When they played back its final footage, they saw only static, except for one frame. A single image of something reaching through what looked like torn space, something that made Sarah's mind recoil. Shapes that suggested arms but moved like equations, surfaces that were both solid and permeable. "It wants something from us," Marcus whispered that night, as the humming grew louder and the trees pressed closer. "A toll for trespassing here, where two worlds touch." Sarah knew he was right. The island wasn't just a place, it was a threshold, a point where reality had worn thin. That's when they saw the body, a deer, fresh dead, floating past their camp. The humming stopped, the trees stilled. Something vast and incomprehensible seemed to consider this offering. Sarah felt the weight of alien attention shift away from them, drawn to the more convenient sacrifice. The next morning, the river had receded enough to leave. They packed in silence, their movements mechanical. As they paddled away with shaking arms, Sarah looked back. The island was shrinking, folding in on itself like paper being crushed. By the time they reached the next bend, it was gone, leaving only a smooth expanse of river where it had been. They never found it on any map. Their phones never showed where they'd been. The drone footage corrupted itself before they could show it to anyone else. But sometimes on quiet nights, Sarah still hears that humming. And when the cottonwoods outside her window move against the wind, she closes her blinds and pretends she doesn't see the geometry of their branches slowly shifting into impossible shapes. Marcus calls her sometimes, always at 3 a.m., to ask if she's been calculating things in her sleep again. She has. They both have. Numbers and equations that lead nowhere in known mathematics but seem to describe spaces that shouldn't exist. And somewhere she knows an island that isn't an island waits for new travelers, while things that were never trees sway to the rhythm of worlds touching.